We're making focaccia today, and honestly guys, this is like my favorite bread to make. It's so flavorful on its own, but it also goes really well with just about any meal you make. And the coolest thing is you can top it basically however you want. Like, you could use this recipe to make pizza if you wanted. We're gonna start off by combining our water, sugar, and yeast and letting that sit for about 10 minutes. We wanna get a good rise out of this dough, so activating your yeast before is an important step. I'm doing this with active dry yeast. Even if you're doing this with instant yeast, let's go ahead and do this. It's not a super necessary step, but it will give you a head start once you start mixing everything together. About 10 minutes later, your yeast will look a little something like this. Not a ton of activity, and there would have been more if I had stirred it, but like I said, this step isn't super necessary. Next, combine the 5 cups of flour and 1 tablespoon of salt in a bowl. Well, as always, whisk it together with your fingers or, an actual whisk. Then add some olive oil and the yeast mix and mix it until it comes together. The olive oil in this dough should make it so your dough doesn't really stick to anything once it comes together, but make sure you're getting everything off the sides of the bowl while you're mixing it. We don't want to leave any goodness behind. Once it's all combined, go ahead and start kneading it. You can do this in the bowl, on a surface, in the air, stretching it, shaking it, whatever works for you. I love kneading focaccia dough because it's not super wet, but it's still super soft. It just feels really fun to touch, and of course, that's how we should make all of our food decisions, right? What I like to do is to take some more oil and toss it onto my work surface and knead it on that. This keeps any extra flour from getting added while also keeping the dough from sticking. Plus, as you'll continue to see, we're gonna add a shit ton of olive oil anyway, so don't worry about it. Anyway, knead it for about 10 minutes, get your arms tired, rest, then keep going. If you're kneading properly, you'll be tired at the end of it. And after about 10 minutes, your dough should be pretty smooth, real sexy. A good way to test if your dough has been kneaded enough is the window pane test. Basically, you should be able to stretch your dough super thin so that you start to be able to see through it before it tears. If your dough isn't quite there yet, like mine, just keep kneading it for a little while longer, and eventually those glutens will build up strong enough to be able to pull this off. Pull that little bit of knowledge out next time you're in the kitchen, and everyone around you will think you're a f***ing genius. Window pane test number 2 looks good to go, so now we're gonna take that bowl from before and coat it in olive oil. Oh my god, nope, it's okay. Calm down, yep, okay, just coat the bowl and then plop the dough into it. Make sure you flip the dough over a couple times to coat it in the oil too. Cover it and let it sit for about 2 hours or until it becomes a massive poofy boy. Okay, 2 hours later, now take a baking sheet and coat it with what feels like way too much olive oil. If you're the kind of person who needs to measure, use about 1/4 cup to 1/3 cup of oil. Make sure you spread it around to all of the edges and up the sides. Take your risen dough and turn it into the sheet, and now here comes the fun part. We're gonna stretch this dough all the way out to the edges of the baking sheet. Take it slow. You don't want to get too aggressive with this and start tearing your dough. Just get it out to those edges and flip it a few times while you're stretching it, again, to make sure you get a butt ton of oil on every inch of it. This bread is basically made of olive oil. But, don't lose your shit, guys. Olive oil isn't bad for you, and flipping it over a few times will help with the stretching. Gravity can be a bitch, but when you're making focaccia, use it to your advantage. Once you've got it stretched out, take your fingers and press into the dough to create little valleys and craters. If you've seen focaccia before, this is the typical texture. It makes it so the bread catches little pools of olive oil. Yes, even more olive oil. Just you f***ing wait. So once you're happy with the texture, cover it and let it proof for another hour or so. Just let it get real poofy again. Big poofy boy. Towards the end of the proving time, preheat your oven to 425. Once your dough has risen again, you're gonna season it. And this part is just to your liking. I use rosemary, oregano, thyme, coarse salt, minced garlic, and more f***ing olive oil. I like to start just kind of drizzling and flicking the olive oil around it, trying to get it to pool in those crevices. Then take your minced garlic, probably anywhere between 2 to 4 cloves, depending on how I'm feeling that day. Again, just kind of drizzle and flick and spread it around evenly. Then you do pretty much the same with your thyme, rosemary, oregano, and salt. Just spread it around evenly to match your own personal taste. I've seen some people put cheese on it as well, and sometimes tomatoes. Like, really go to town however you like. My biggest recommendation though is the salt. The coarse salt really is the best part. You don't want to use fine ground table salt because the bread overall becomes too salty. But if you use coarse salt, and it's just that you get a pop of salt in your bites, it's amazing. Okay, once you've got it topped all to your liking, pop it into the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes or until you like the color. I like it to be a good, deep golden brown, just heading into the other side of dark. That'll give you a nice crisp on the outside while still being fluffy on the inside. And then once you take it out, let it rest in the baking sheet for about 15 minutes before you tear into this. And then enjoy. This bread is really good just on its own because of how much fucking olive oil is in it. If you've done it right, it won't come out dry and crumbly, but have a good tight structure and be delicious. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to try this recipe for yourself, you can visit my Patreon where all of my recipes are available for free. You don't have to be a patron because charging for educational content is up. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, and let me know how it turns out if you do give it a go. Now go bake some shit.